Welcome back to Mom with a Microphone. I'm really excited because today we have a special guest, and this special guest is my sister. And it's not just like, oh, that's my sister, that's my place. No, this is like my real life blood sister. Came from the same people. This is my sister, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, I am her sister.
There will be a lot of that, by the way. This is very much who she is.
I am her older sister. And yeah, it's the first one. And
tell us who you are. Tell us about you.
I don't know. I'm a mom of 5. I am a professor at a community college. I've been in the education sector since 2001 when I went off to college. I started there as like secretary work in the dean's office in computer science. When I graduated, I went on to be a financial aid advisor. In there, I ended up being the international student rep and student liaison. From there, I went on to be an academic counselor. I was an academic advisor for a little while. I was a nursing student advisor and counselor. From there, I was the international student rep as well, and I was approving visas, F1 visas for students to come from other countries to college. From there, I went on and eventually became a teacher in the college sector. So mostly education background. I do some script writing and things like that on the side. If you're still into watching holiday movies right now, I'm not sure when this will air. I wrote a movie that came out in November called Just in Time for the Holiday. So I wrote it. I didn't do the producing and the shooting, but I did do the writing on that. So
I didn't even know that. So
yeah, I do a lot of things on the side. So interact with the community a lot. I do homeless interaction in my city. I do HOA, been the president of HOA for going on 5 years. So a lot of community involvement, a lot of stuff I do on the side. But my biggest concern and focus, I'd say, is education. So,
which is what we're going to be talking about today. So safe to say you clearly have a lot of experience in education and different aspects in areas of education. You have 5 kids, all of whom are in the public school system. Correct. Well, most of whom are in the public school system. A couple of them are not quite old enough. But you've got one who is in college, so you've seen it from K through 12 on into secondary education, on into college. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not going to put any limits on what it is you have to say. So I'm not even... I want you to just start,
and then if you try,
listen. I already know, but I'm gonna let you talk, and as I have questions, I'm gonna just chip in.
Okay. Where do you want to start?
So the current condition of public education. What are your thoughts?
I actually am very much against, I'd say, education in the sense of how public education is now. And I'd say I've been kind of against it for several years. My kids are in the public sector, but it is a back and forth between my husband and I. And I don't know. I think my biggest issue is that schooling, in my mind, shouldn't be a full-time job. Schooling shouldn't be from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, and then your kids don't walk in the door until 5 o'clock. For example, my kids, we have the elementary school in my neighborhood, literally in my neighborhood. They have to ask me permission, because I'm the president of the HOA. They have to ask me permission if they want the kids to come over around our lakes, like literally in our neighborhood. And we can probably walk there within, I'd say, 5 to 7 minutes from my house. And I can remember Cammie, our oldest daughter, when she started, I want to say 5th grade, she rode the bus the first day. Now, I am a mom who drops their kids off to school. For elementary, I actually would walk our kids to school and then pick them up by car. My middle schooler, I would drop him off by car. He would ride the bus home. The oldest one, he would ride the bus to school, and then I would pick him up after school. The quicker they can get home, the better, sort of thing. But the middle schooler asked to ride the bus home because I was going to get him. Anyway, last year, Cammy's in 6th grade now, but last year, at the start of the year, school starts, 8:05, and she decided she wanted to ride the bus home. So she rode the bus home the first day. Cammy didn't walk in the door until after 5 o'clock. Now, this is a school that's in our neighborhood that I can walk to in 5 minutes. And of course, it's, oh, well, we have a lot of kids and it's the first couple of days, this and that. By the second day, it was after 5 again, and I about lost my mind. But my biggest issue with the schooling system as it is that the districts get money from the state based on how many hours your kids are in school. So if they are in school all day, the schools get that full amount. If they're half day, that money is, prorated down. If they leave home, leave sick, if they go to the doctor's office, they're doing all these calculations. And I just honestly don't feel that kids need to be in school for that long. Part of it, I think, is because parents work and, they've taken that into account. But I think that more than anything, the education system has taken advantage of that. And, the kids go from August all the way until June, essentially, which is way too long. In my mind, schooling, if they're going to have schooling, they don't need to have school every day. In Texas, I live in Texas, some of the schools have started adapting this 4-day week. But even farther than that, I honestly feel that kids don't need to be in school more than 3 to 4 hours a day. Yes, they need their math. Yes, they need their science. Yes, they need their English. As far as history goes, I honestly feel that that's something that...
It's debatable because it's too tampered and watered down and manipulated.
Yes, it's whitewashed. It's very controlled. You get a Black History Month and they tell you about Martin Luther King. But beyond that and that we were slaves, you don't hear that. You don't get as much information about the Native Americans who were here first. The Chinese people who came over and the railroads, like that kind of stuff is all omitted. So that I feel like doesn't need to be done in school. On top of that, kids get 25 minutes for lunch. They get one recess, which is about 20 minutes long. Then they fill their days with library and gym every day. And they fill it with, extracurriculars. But as far as the actual schooling part goes, if you take all those extra things they've done and add it to kind of fluff up the day, they really don't need more than, I'd say, 4 hours max to get through actual education part of it.
So it's interesting because two things. One, I'm a teacher. And I teach a fine art. And I already feel like the amount of time that I have typically gotten, not so much since COVID, but pre-COVID and working with elementary kids, like I taught in the biggest elementary school in the state. And there were, I saw 900 kids on a 3-day rotation, which is insane when you really think about it. Like it took me a very long time to learn all their names. Like the FaceTime was very, very minimal. I saw them, once every 3 days for maybe 40 minutes, which in my head, it's like, okay, as a teacher, I felt very much the pressure of these are the national standards and things that these kids have to know because this is what's been mandated down from people who aren't even educators and don't have the slightest clue most of the time. But there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. Like, okay, I have to teach these kids this. And as a fine arts teacher, where would that fall in? Do they need to know those things? Do they not need to know that in your head? Because you're saying, minimal time with just mostly core classes. But do you think that being taught music and other fine arts and art, and maybe even PE, is there value to it? Is there not value to it?
I think there's value to it to a point. So I can see in elementary, gym being mandated, art being mandated, music being mandated, those sort of things. But beyond that, I'm not sure my middle schooler needs to, learn music. You know what I mean? I feel like in other countries, they've taken up this aspect of by the time you are in, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or even, 9, 10, 11, 12, they've called that college prep. It's no longer the way they have it here in the States. And so by then, they're looking into their interests, they're looking into the things that, they're wanting to do for their future. So I think that it does hold some value at the younger stages, but as they get older, same way, they have kind of adapt that to like more electives in middle school and then high school. I kind of think that the way it is, yes, there is some value to it. Would my kids be hindered or detrimented if they didn't have art once a week for 30 minutes or whatever it is? You know what I mean? It's not like...
So it should be a selective thing, literally, where if you're saying, this is prep for my future, I feel like this is what I'm going to potentially do, then they get to pick based on that. Is that what you're saying? Or
when they're older, when they're younger, I just kind of feel like even the amount of time in elementary school that they're getting, like my kids get gym every day. They get gym every day. But library once a week. They get music, I want to say once a week. They get art maybe twice. I can't remember what they've done, but it's gone down to the part that's like essentially 30 minutes.
Yeah. So I was going to reference other countries also. And schooling everywhere else looks different than it does in America. And as a teacher, like I have looked into what would it be like to instruct in another country? What would it be like to send my kids and just experience education somewhere else? Because it feels like for the most part, everybody else has it kind of figured out, But then I think also on the flip side of that, it's hard to, so like if my kid said, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a musician, but we didn't offer that opportunity, and there are, when you consider, I struggle because I get why we say, hey, and it's a gimmick, you need PE every day when you're young because we're going to combat obesity and we're going to combat this and that. And we're going to put healthy foods in the cafeteria. But what's not taken into consideration or what there's no control over is what happens when they leave the doors of the school. The issue that these kids, kids that struggle with obesity, a lot of times it has nothing to do with what goes in their mouth at school and everything to do with what's at home, which is what we can't control. The education system cannot entirely control. And so in my head, it's like, okay, how do we make it like fair game for the kids who want to pursue music beyond elementary school and say, and still get to experience it? Because the truth is like people take more interest in the things that they have access to and the things that they can experience on the regular, you know what I mean? To like develop a passion for, if that makes any sense. So what would the ideal school system look like? Like
in my mind?
Lay it out.
I think that in my mind, an ideal layout would be half days. Like I said, when you look at homeschooling, I don't know, like I did homeschooling well during COVID with my kids. The actual amount of work that at least the elementary kids were doing at the time,
Couple hours.
They'd be done in maybe 2.5, 3 hours to get through that, right? If that kind of approach was done, in my mind, like I said, an ideal, they would still have time for that once a week. You know what I mean? In a half day, they'd still have time for that 40-minute or 30-minute music class. They'd still have time for that, art class. They'd still have time for gym if they made them do that twice a week. I honestly don't feel that gym is needed every day.
Yeah.
Because essentially they're just playing, a 30, 40-minute game, which, if they really want to do something, give these kids 2 recesses. When we were in elementary school, we had 2 recesses, you know?
And depends on where you are, because I know by state, like where we are, my kids get 2 recesses a day. So they get the 25-minute lunch or whatever. They get the 2 recesses. They have PE, but it's on a rotating schedule. So like PE, library, music, art, and technology maybe all rotate. So every day, and then so it changes, but it's only like a however many minute class, and they see them once a week also. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that a little more like what you're kind of referencing? Yes, besides the whole school day, the whole being there.
Do I think it should be on rotation, you mean?
Like, yeah, is that more ideal? Like, let's experience this on a rotation instead of you have to have this every day, or?
Well, and I don't think that electives are even given, even when we were kids. Like, you know, we didn't see Miss Esching every day or Mr. Cobb every day. You know what I mean? It was like maybe twice a week or whatever it was. But I don't know. I kind of feel like there's just a lot of fluffing going on. And so, like I said, when we were doing homeschooling, and I've looked into homeschooling a couple, times even since then, because every year I go to the same thing of not wanting to send my kids back. I feel like English and math and science, is something that kids should be doing, especially in elementary school every day. History, I don't feel like that's something that needs to be taught every day, especially the way it's being taught and the things that are being taught. But even doing all those things every day, it should not take 8 to 4 o'clock. It should not take 8 to 4 o'clock.
So that brings me to something else. So I can remember at one of my second ever teaching position. So you were saying that schools get money based on the number of hours that kids are in school. They also get paid based on the number of days that the kids are in school.
Correct.
And then they also get paid based on attendance.
Yep.
And they also get paid based on demographic. And so I can remember my second ever teaching job being the only person of color, I think, who had ever worked in the district, number one. Number two, I think they had a couple of mixed kids that attended in the history of the entire school, public, mind you. And so there wasn't a lot of diversity. And so I can remember when I started teaching there and then got pregnant with my first, the pressure that I felt, because I felt like they kept asking, you're going to send her here, right? You're going to send her here, right? And in my head, it wasn't because you wanted me to stay necessarily. Like, yes, I did a great job. Not gonna lie, I did a great job. But it was because they wanted that diversity.
The number.
Yeah. Well, the number, but the diversity, because this would have been their first ever child of color. And even though it's only one, it still adds demographically,
My thought on that is one is not enough to call your school diverse.
No, but when you consider history and the things that qualify, and the people who create these curriculums and things like that, it is. In their head, it is. You know what I mean?
In my mind, it's not enough to call your school diverse, but it is enough to get additional money from the state. On top of that, if you can get your diverse kids into special programs, whether it's a behavioral problem, whether it's a learning disability, they get additional money on top of that.
So let's talk about that, because we saw some of that growing up.
Yeah.
So to give a little background, do you want to give some background as to like what it was like for us growing up?
We went to school out in the suburbs.
In Missouri.
Yeah, and actually have started writing a documentary on that kind of stuff. I call myself the Afro chameleon, because I feel that because I am the way we grew up, I'm able to fit in that sector with white people. I'm able to fit in with black people now, but it took longer because of
all of it. Yeah. So dive into that a little bit.
But I kind of feel, like she said, for longest we were just kind of like flying the milk. I can
Literally.
remember being the black house on the street until, the other family had moved in. I can remember always being the black child in class, whether we were in private school.
That was always.
Whether we were in private school or even when we went on to public school, getting jobs. Me and my best friend Candace, we were, the black girls there. I mean, it was just everywhere we went. And, which a lot of people can see as a detriment. For me, ultimately, I think that became something that was a positive, because I'm able to sit in a room full of white men and be assertive and not feel awkward, because, I was running around with 5 white guys, you know what I mean? And people were looking at us like we're crazy. But for us, that became the norm.
Yeah.
And so where we grew up, because I guess we were the only, we experienced racism. We experienced, treatment difference, and a lot of, just little...
It was a lot of ignorance.
I was going to say passive aggressive.
There was a lot of ignorance, too.
And just a whole lot of stuff. And even at a point where, they tried to, our little brother, they tried to say, oh, he needed to be tested, things like that. And our parents actually got him tested, not at their school, but at, an accredited place, to say, hey, there's nothing wrong. He's fine. You're just trying to get him into these programs, and that's what it is.
And they tried. And it was literally every year from the time he was in kindergarten until he was in 5th grade. And it wasn't just one person. It was coming from several people. So people who didn't even interact with him. And I can remember these conversations because for a little while we were in the same school until I went to middle school. And I can remember people coming left and right trying to get him into these programs that would just really benefit him. And, and it's funny because even now being a teacher, back then it felt like they worked so hard to get him in. Looking at now how kids can qualify for services, parents have to jump through hoops to get the kids help that they actually need.
Right.
So it's really interesting to see that and how they went so hard for the little black boy.
And it's usually the boys.
And it's usually the black boys.
It's not typically the girls.
But even think about that. Think in terms of just male, female, who of the two in a room of 30 people, 15 males, 15 females, who's probably going to be doing the most talking, who's probably the more opinionated. That's just biologically, I think, part of it. But again, when you look at how little black boys were being targeted, and I'm talking a lot, but I'm going to jump forward to my 3rd ever teaching position happened to be at that same school that we went to for elementary school. And at that point it was I think it still is the largest in the state. And I can remember being so excited to go teach there because my experience there was wonderful. We had stuff, but that stuff was everywhere in our lives. The, overt racism and the different treatments and all that stuff. I didn't focus so much on those things, but I don't think I knew to. And I don't even think I knew sometimes when I was having experiences of racism that I knew that that's what it was when I was that young. So I was excited to go teach at this school. And when I say y'all, COVID hit, and I was so grateful I didn't have to go back for the last half of the year because it was so terrible. It was so terrible. And the way that I saw little black children being treated, it was so stupid. And I just remember, at one point I became the spokesperson, the token spokesperson, because nobody else was doing it. And I was just why is this a thing? Why is this a thing still? Blew my mind.
That same school my oldest went to for kindergarten, 1st and 2nd. And we ultimately ended up moving. That wasn't necessarily the plan, but part of the decision for me to go ahead and move was the way that my son was being treated. Oh, he won't sit in small group and this and that. Well, yeah, he's bored. He knows how to read. He knows how to write. He knows how to do math. And while you're teaching the color blue, he's bored and was taught, instead of being a disturbance and a problem, just kind of remove yourself, and he would go sit by himself or whatever, to the point that I was sending school work for him. And actually, he was able I feel, to skip. Two of my other kids have also skipped. But they kept saying this, well, what about socially?
When you say skip, you mean skip grades.
Skip grades.
Yes.
It was, oh, but is he socially ready? And in my mind, it was like, well, maybe, and maybe I shouldn't push this and that. But even when we left, we experienced, the racism part in Seattle, where we lived there for a while. We currently live in Texas, in Houston. And that is where I will say that we essentially have had no problems. We've had the diversity. We've had, which I think is a huge impact on students. We've had teachers of color, we've had Hispanic teachers, we've had Asian teachers, we've had, and to be able to have a teacher that you
looks like
you and you can see yourself in. I never had a black teacher, even through college. We had a black sub.
I don't even remember that man.
I was going to say Mr. Jones or something.
My first ever black teacher was in grad school.
I didn't have one in grad school either.
That was it.
But I think it's important that students are able to see someone like them. You know what I mean? And I'll just be completely honest with you. Growing up, the majority of teachers that we had, and even my oldest had before we moved to Houston, was white women. And I feel that education is seen as a white woman's space. I feel that having male teachers, whatever race they are, is such a benefit. But I don't feel that men a lot of times feel like that is their space. And so that's why we see so much less of them. But I would tell you, white women, in my experience in this space, spend a lot of time of, do you respect me? And I'm your superior. And yes, ma'am. A lot of that I see. And I spend a lot of times, like, I'll go to lunch with my kids. I pop up at the school to volunteer. You know what I mean? Just to be there. And I absolutely warn teachers at the start of school, before school starts, you don't want to play with me, because I'm that person. But I just feel that in that space, white women have kind of owned that space. And to them, it's more, hey, I am your superior. I am, they want to do this motherly crap.
But it's not entirely motherly. It's, you have to obey me. But that's part of the parenting instead of the relationship part of the, of the parenting.
But even the people who don't have kids, because I'll ask, how many kids? Oh, I don't have any kids.
Oh.
Why are you in this space? How can you be someone who is, you can learn information.
I'm going to combat that a little bit, because I know some super effective, like, amazing teachers that have no kids. Some because they just were never able to.
I was going to say a lot of them.
And some because they just are not there yet in their lives. They're still young and they're still, haven't taken that route yet. And then, so I think it literally just depends on the person. There are people who become teachers and their room becomes a place of 100% control. Like where it's, you walk into my space. And I'll be honest, like my first couple of years of teaching, that was absolutely me. Like, these are my rules, these are my expectations, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think when that outweighs the relationship that you build with the child so that they can actually learn from you, then it just becomes trash. Like you're doing nothing to benefit them. Because kids can't learn from someone that they don't respect or don't relate to. And not that they can't, but they won't. They're less likely to.
No, they can't, because they can't get past the part of how you're treating them.
Yeah.
And trying to make it more about ego. And I even see it where I'm at. And I spend a lot of time subbing, especially in this last year, for other teachers to see how they're doing their classes. And I'll tell you, every time it's, and we can talk. Oh, we're doing a group work. Oh, you're not just going to sit and lecture. It's like, I don't learn that way. I'm not going to teach you that way. And my first thing that I do in all of my classes is speed meeting, because I feel like
the relationship component.
Yeah, they need to have to come in and be able to see, okay, well, I can go sit by Sarah. I can go sit by, Jose or whoever, you know what I mean? And see these people and not just feel like they're coming into a room where they're not very comfortable because they don't know anybody. And so in my classes, if you're going into a place to learn, you have to first feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable with the teacher, if you don't feel comfortable with the students, how can you feel that you can learn? Because if I'm not someone who you can approach, if I'm not someone who you can trust, if I'm not somebody who you feel comfortable with, what are you going to be able to get from me?
Yeah. So for me, my oldest is like, she's the most positive kid. And sometimes it drives me nuts because I'm like, dude, I need you to understand that life is real. Like, there's some real things you got to sometimes, not everything can be worked out positively. Yes, you can have a positive outlook, but everything is not great just because it happened, you know? And so like someone like that who is young, she's in elementary school, and every year she goes to school and loves her teacher right away. And I think it's great to an extent. But I can remember in first grade, she had a teacher that she loved this teacher, thought she was wonderful. I did not. I did not love this teacher. And I knew from the beginning of the year because she would send, we started getting emails and, oh, Anaya's having a hard time with the boys in the class. And you know, and oh, Anaya seems to just be having these confrontations with these certain little kids. Well, what are you doing about it? Well, it's 21 kids in the class and I can't see everything. But you can see enough that you see her having a problem, but you don't see the other side of it. Like, that to me is a problem. What area, like, where have you addressed the other kids' parents? What's happening? What's causing these issues to take place? And you can't give me any kind of information. And so I had to become that, let me tell you about, let me fix it for you. And so we were getting emails like every week. And I remember one kid, she tried to tell us that Anaya was wrong in her response to this kid because he's in like sped. And I was like, no. If this kid can tell her to go kill herself, he knows exactly what he's saying. And so she wrote him a letter. Dear so-and-so, you're really annoying. I think you're disgusting. Love, Anaya. Like, said love. Like, this is this kid, right? And the teacher's like, this is a problem because I said, nope, it's not a problem. And all of her words were spelled correctly in first grade. Where's the problem? Please tell me where the problem is. And so she's like, well, I just think, I said, how about this? Because she kept emailing me at school. And I was like working. I was like, how about this? I can be there in 10 minutes if I need to. I work 30 minutes away, but I'll be there in 10 if I need to. And we can all sit down and have this whole conversation because why is she having all these problems with these little white boys? And you're not addressing anything that these little white boys are doing, but you're coming to me. So that is a concern for me. Like, these kids, they love their teachers and they don't understand that sometimes it's really not best interest for everybody.
Well, and I think that's another point is, why are the sped kids in class with my kids?
They should be integrated.
I don't feel
maybe not full day.
I don't feel they should be. And I also don't feel that No Child Left Behind.
Yeah, that's trash.
I don't believe in that either. I feel that, and we went to school with special kids and they were actually, separated from us. I don't feel that the classes should be altered for all inclusion. I don't think altered is the word. But again, I think it depends on what classroom you are in. I don't necessarily alter my classroom. I will make accommodations for a child, but I don't completely alter the way that I do things or anything like that. I don't think a pace should be slowed. I don't think that it should. And I understand that in the world you are mixed in with everybody. I understand that. But if your capability of learning is not the baseline, then I think that I
think brings us to another point, because education in general shouldn't look like a one size fits all. And I think that's where the problem comes in, because in other countries, again, that is not a battle that they're facing. But it comes down from government and national standards full of people who don't have a clue and who aren't educators, you know what I mean? Like, there should not ever be a one size fits all for any education, because it should be catered to the individual. And that, I think, is what we're coming down to, right? Like, so yes, there should be, in my head, integration. Like, I teach music, right? And I remember one of my struggles and one of my battles was I had kids in my class who were literally mute. Some couldn't hear and some couldn't speak. If you can't speak, and I want them to experience music, but you can't experience choir if you can't speak, And so that was like one of my battles. But there, like, all this to say, there are so many areas of the education system that need to be fixed, it's hard to figure out how to fix them, because even though other countries have other systems that are seemingly working, none of them are perfect, you know? And then when you consider even the family dynamic between our country and other countries and the things that they place value on, it makes a whole difference in like what you see education wise, right? Like a lot of times in other countries, like they do have half days and kids go home and eat lunch with their families, and they, you know, they have this and they have that. And a lot of our kids go to broken homes just historically. Like it's a completely different set of things that are being served to these kids. So it's like, what do we do? How do we fix it?
Speaking of other countries, I'll say my husband is Jamaican, and the school system there, half days. And part of it is because of space, you know. So some of the kids go from like
In the morning, and then some go later in the day?
7 to like
Ooh.
11 or 11:30, and the other ones go from like noon to like 5. So that's part of it. But I never heard of him mention, hey, you know, we had a special child in our class. We had, you know what I mean? Like, and I know that, you know, there's special school districts and things like that. But I think you're right. The whole approach to schooling in other places is completely different. You know, they don't have a lot of times lunch at school. They go home for lunch, you know, even if they have full day, another, you know what I mean? They'll come
go
home
and come back,
and
yeah.
even the parents go home, and lunchtime is a couple hour, you know what I mean? Like it's a whole push for cohesion. They have in other countries these hours where businesses shut down between, you know, 3 and 5 or whatever it is, and you know everybody kind of comes together. But yeah, you know, I'm just thinking, I've never heard him say, yeah, we had, you know,
Yeah.
a special child in our class, and I have them in my classes as well. I have, you know, everybody at the community college, everybody. So I've had senior citizens in my class. You know, I've had middle-aged adults. I've had, you know, people who are returning learners. I've had students with IEPs and who, you know, have to go to disability services. I've had interpreters, sign language people in my class. I've had helping dogs, of nurses, somebody who's blind and somebody who's there taking notes and interacting with them and all that. And even with all of that, the expectation is that you have some sort of minimum level.
Is it everybody is on the same minimum, or are you saying like whatever their individual minimum is?
No.
So everybody has to have the same.
You have to be able to do
this and this and this and this.
your work. You have to have been able to pass, you know, whatever math test or whatever it is to get into college. And I don't. I understand, like, you know, if they are requesting notes, you know, and they have, you know, disability, yes, I'll provide notes. I'll provide, you know, PowerPoints. I'll provide my lecture videos if you want that. But as far as grading you different,
that's an accommodation.
Work what?
That providing, like, if they need the extra notes or slides, that's an accommodation.
But I post mine.
Right, but I'm saying that's still, like, it's still an accommodation.
Yeah, it is.
But I get what you're saying. Like, there has to be, like, a minimum.
Yes.
You have to be able to do this.
But for me, I post my lectures and my notes and my PowerPoints anyway in my online shells, because I teach online classes sometimes. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they have to be able to. You're also
at the collegiate level.
Yes.
And so it's very different than elementary, middle, high. Specifically elementary and middle.
Yes.
Where it's required by law to go to school, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's a whole nother thing too.
But these people are paying. You know what I mean?
Right. And there's something different at stake when you're investing something personally.
And honestly, it almost to me feels like it should be the flipped almost. You know
pay for your kids to go to elementary, and then if you want to continue, be free.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if you're paying for school, then that extra, you know what I mean, should be provided because you're paying.
Yeah.
Whereas in elementary school, you're not. You know what I mean? Like, but they're mixing these kids in, and I don't know. To me, it's kind of like a catch-22 almost. It's like mixing these kids in to make them feel that they're not different, but also identifying them as different.
Yeah. So I think, and in my head, and again, no one understands the public school system because it's not it's whatever. But in my head, the goal of public schooling and the reason why we have national standards, I think it's well intentioned. I don't think it's well put together or thought out or like implemented. But the whole goal is to get everyone to this baseline so that when they go to continued education, from there they can sort out and everyone can be on, I think that's kind of the whole goal of standardized testing, even though it's trash.
That's the goal, but if you don't have the capability to be at that baseline, what are we doing?
But you're not going to find, at least in continued education, like you're not going to find someone who is not
mentally capable to do the work.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like no parent is going to be like, here, let's put you into college, even though I know that this is not something that you're capable of doing. Another thing I struggle. Okay,
I got a couple.
But another thing
done their kids' work and shown up to class.
Listen, another thing I struggle with though is like limitations, and I tell my kids all the time, like I'm not going to put limitations on you, which is why I do accommodations. Like so, if I've got a kid, so I teach middle school choir, and if I have a kid who is in 6th grade who comes in new to music, takes off with something like sight reading, I'm not going to stop you. Like I will give you additional resources so that you can go further. I'll never cap you and say stay here until next year when you're in 7th. That's stupid. And then on the flip side, it's like, I think that's why it's so hard. Like the work of a teacher is so difficult, especially at these younger levels, is because you work to get everybody here and everybody's here. You know what I mean? And it's a never-ending job because by middle school, at least too, you've got kids with so many gaps, and a lot of times they're unidentified because they just skirted through elementary school. No one caught them along the way, or they pushed them on so they didn't have to deal with them. Like it's a whole nother thing, right? And like that's another reason why. And I have never considered homeschool. I don't think
it every day.
I don't think God made me to be a stay-at-home mom who homeschools. I don't think so. But when I consider like some of the things so in my first 5 or so years of teaching, I remember there was a like curriculum that was being released in the public schools. Didn't have any kids, didn't have any old enough for sure to be in schools at the time, where they started teaching about different things that I would not have taught my child. Definitely not at a young age. And it's like, oh, like these are curriculums that are being released because someone up here said this is what we're going to start teaching now. What are your thoughts on that?
What are we talking about?
So specifically, they were teaching kindergartners and first graders about transgenders and how people can choose what gender they're going to be or what they identify as. Teaching this.
I think it's just another way to elongate the day. It's just another thing they're adding to get money and find ways to keep and have something to keep teaching in order to, you know what I mean? Like it's always something. My kids, they've talked about that in middle school. That wasn't offered in our district in elementary, but in middle school, and you have to sign off if you want your kid to do that. They have, they talk about domestic violence, and you have to sign off for that. I mean, there's all these little things that they are adding and implementing. And, they talk about church and state, and they talk about
the separation of,
all these things. And I think those lines have severely been blurred. And I think part of it is grasping at straws for ways to
control,
but also to have something to be, to say, hey, we need to be the ones that are doing this, which just gives them more time and all that stuff. My kids, I talk to them about that kind of stuff. We, my husband and I, the sex talk, they almost laugh at me at this point because, they come home.
They probably know more than I do.
Well, they come home and I'm like, every so often I'm like, did somebody touch you? And they laugh at me because, in my mind, I'm like, they're not, a lot of times kids aren't going to just come and, you know what I mean? Like there's no segue.
Yeah.
So for me, like that. And I'll sit my kids down, I'll call a family meeting and we'll watch a video that talks about, appropriateness and not appropriateness. And they think that's funny too, the older ones, but it's, age appropriate for the little ones as well. So all those things that, they're trying to teach, my kids have already heard and seen from me.
Which brings me to another point, right? Like, parents are a child's first educators, and they're their primary educators. And I think a lot of parents don't feel that way anymore, which is where we keep running into issues, like things that in our home and in our lives, like these were things that should have been taught at home. Other people, like kids these days, are not getting that. I see so many parents that want to be their kid's friend and they don't want to discipline them, and they don't, and it's just like, oh man. And I think all of that contributes to the downfall of public education, if we're being honest, because, the things that, like for a teacher, our job is already difficult. But when you throw in kids that are just disrespectful, and then you see that they treat their parents the same way, or their parents are hyping them up to be disrespectful, and it's like, wow, like it's an unnecessary fight. And my only goal is to just educate your kid. You know what I mean? And I think that really contributes, because then you've got this group of kids over here who's doing their work, and they're learning, and they're trying, and they're making, they're giving effort, and they're trying to contribute to the citizenship of in the community of the class. And then we have these kids over here who are constantly combating that. And it's not because they're just coming in with the idea that I'm going to be terrible. It's because they're struggling with other things. And and then we as teachers have to give our attention to all of that at the same time. It's a lot. So I think, and I think there is a place, I want my kids to learn, having a conversation about, my oldest has asked, like, what is transgender? But I want to be the one to give my kids that information.
Do they not give the option at your school?
This was not here. This was at a job that, where I used to teach. So not even in the same city. And I have not, as far as I know, that's not been a conversation at school for my kids right now.
Well, not in the setting where they're sitting them down and telling them, but the kids at this
kids
age
talk about stuff for
about
sure.
everything.
But I'm talking about like specifically instruction coming from the teachers, because I don't want my kids to receive that stuff through education.
Yeah.
So those are things that they learn from me. You know what I mean?
And then, when they send those letters home, the kids will bring them to the table and I'll say, well, do you want to do this? Do you want to go to this?
Yep.
And sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no, but it's all, and I give them that option because we've already talked about it.
Right.
They already know what's what. You know what I mean? Like,
and that's another component, like the fact that your kids can come and ask you about things. It lets them know that this is their primary source of education. Like this is where they're going to get what they need. And I mean, even now I have kids that at school who will come and ask me stuff, and I'm like, ooh, and I can't, like, sometimes I feel like I can't answer that as much as I want to. I can't answer that for you. Or I can't give you information on that or whatever. And it's like, for me, it's sad because it's like they're going to go to wherever they feel like they can get the most education.
Oh, and if they could go to their parents, they wouldn't be coming to you.
Exactly. But that place is TikTok. And it's like, oh my God, like, okay. I've learned some great things on TikTok. Yeah. None of which have created my moral standard or compass, like, period. But it just is like, education in general, families, homing, like parents as teachers, all of it kind of impacts what we're dealing with now, the current condition of public education.
Well, and I'm sitting here thinking about COVID, when COVID hit, and the kids who were forced to stay home, and how much detriment that caused to some kids. And not because they weren't in school for learning, but because they didn't have a safe place.
Or they didn't have food.
They didn't have, anybody. They were locked up in the house all day because their parents were, you know what I mean? Like all those things. And I feel that a lot of people will blame COVID for, gaps and things. But the truth is, you either thrived during COVID or you faltered and failed during COVID. For me, I felt like it was almost a present that everyone got to be home. And I know that everybody doesn't feel that way. But for me, I don't like sending my kids to school anyway. I don't like the communication from the school. I don't like that. I don't feel that kids are safe at school. And so home for my kids and home for them to all be there for me was a gift. And I loved that. And I didn't feel that, they kind of just ended school in March that year. And then it was like, okay, what are we doing? And they were scrambling to even find things to do. And then, they came back with this, like Skype calls. The kids were on that for, a couple hours or having their turn stuff on online. And then they, slowly made the kids come back. But I just kind of think that, there's a huge gap somewhere in the United States in priorities and what parents you're choosing to have kids. So where is the work that you're putting in? Where is, you know what I mean? Because it can't just be all on the teachers.
Exactly.
They can't do this all. They can't do it without you. If you're not doing your job and you're worried about your 9-to-5 job, which to me is not your biggest job. Your biggest job is these kids that you've brought in here and this, these adults that are going to be out in the world. If you're not doing your part there, it's not on the schooling system. You know what I mean? You should know before somebody else that your kid's struggling with math. You shouldn't have to wait for a report card. You shouldn't, you know what I mean? Are you asking? Are you saying, like, there's just this whole side where I think that if more parents were involved, more parents were doing what they're supposed to be doing, wouldn't maybe need an 8 to 4 o'clock schooling because they're using it for daycare. You know what I mean? Like,
so how do we fix that for parents who can't stay home and be with their kids? Like, what do you do for the other half of the day? If we had this, your ideal system of schooling from 8 to noon or whatever, what happens the rest of the day?
After school care, the same way they have boys and girls clubs, the same way they have all these things. In Texas, there's a lot of little buses that come and take them to like these little off-site daycares. There's after-school clubs and programs, and then after-school buses. I think that if they treated it that same way.
So it's not necessarily like you have to go home.
Right.
It's just the formal part of school is done within 4 hours.
Correct.
So my first ever teaching job was a private charter-ish type school. Mm-hmm. And we only had school 4 days a week. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. And then eventually it became we don't have anywhere to send our kids, so we're going to send them to school even though there's not formal instruction or anyone to formally watch them, which I felt like I had a problem with that part of it. But the idea of a 4-day school week is not entirely terrible to me, and even as an educator. I want to talk, and you don't really have to deal with this, I guess, with college, but like for me, one of my struggles right now is block scheduling, where we have kids for like 84 minutes.
We did that in middle school.
Every other day. I don't remember that. Like we did during map testing. I can remember during map testing, but I don't remember that.
We did Monday and Tuesday and Friday were regular days. Wednesday and Thursday, you did 1, 3, 5, 7 on Wednesday, and then 2, 4, 6, 8 on Thursday.
Yeah, and ours is similar. Like, so we have 4 days of block scheduling and 1 day of like 8 period. And as a core teacher, maybe I can see how it could be beneficial. As a fine arts teacher, it's so detrimental because when you're teaching, it's a lot of time. But that's not the problem. I actually find myself running out of time more often than with the 8 period day. But it's when you're learning something new like music, it's like learning a new language, and to only do it, every other day or twice a week, and then I don't see you for another week, and then on days where there's the kids come back and they don't remember stuff, and there's a lot of like reteaching and which I'm good with reteaching, but there's a lot of like we're combating other things too. But so yeah, this idea of like block scheduling, like I just, like I said, I don't think there's like here's a way to fix it all. I think education is very much it's a personal, individual thing. And I think we've made it into, here's the one size fits all. And if you don't fall into this, you're the problem. And that's a problem for me.
When I think about what you're saying, like, the kids forgetting and all that. In my mind, how long can I sit you here and talk about science and how much you're really absorbing after a certain amount of time. You've been here 8 to 4 something. At what point did you stop learning and you're just walking through and going through the motions? Because I know that if I sit with my 4-year-old and we do math and we do reading essentially every day and loves math, I can say, hey, what's 7 tens plus 2 tens? And he'll 90, or what's, 7 and 10. But I'll say, okay, sound this word out. And we can do that for, 20 to 30 minutes. And by the end, he's frustrated. And he's gotten through it, because we will sit there until you get through this lesson. It's like a lesson a day. But he is frustrated. So my mind, everybody is good at some subjects. There's not anybody I don't feel that is just excellent at all subjects.
Right.
Yes, you can learn it and you can, understand it and you can get through it. But as far as it's my favorite and I love this, I love everything, there's just not that. So at what point in the lesson about history, in the lesson about science, in the lesson about spelling or whatever, were you done? Because when you come back tomorrow and we do this same thing all day again, and you were done after 10 minutes, but we've moved on.
Yeah.
Which
is another gap created. It's another gap created.
Yeah. And so, August to May or June for some schools is a very long time. And if you have this curriculum, how can that be broken down daily in 30-minute increments or whatever? Because I find that a lot of the information, especially towards the end of the school year, that my kids are coming home with, well, we did learn the information that they needed for the STAR test, which is the state test. And that is essentially, in my mind, all that our district is doing is just making sure that they are teaching to this test,
which is,
and then filling with other information.
That's the issue with standardized testing.
And then just filling with other information the last month or whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever it is. And it's like, why not just be done with school then?
Do you remember growing up and we would ask, like, okay, why do we have to learn this? Because you're going to need it in,
But that's part of my point. Like, I haven't used history.
To date, I still have not, I don't even use the math. If I can count to 4, I can get through my job because I just do rhythms all day. You know what I'm saying? But I
use the math because I'm helping my kids who are in school.
So, and that's the other thing. The math has changed so much, I can't help you. You're on your own, bro.
That Common Core is the worst.
And it makes me so mad because I looked at a page recently that my oldest brought home. She had the right answer, but didn't show one part of the work. And the lady marked around. I was like, wrong. This is the right answer. No, I know, but this is dude. Why? Literally, teaching is the art of explanation. If it takes 5 times to one kid to explain it 5 different ways so that they get it, as long as they get it, they got it. I don't understand why it has to be that particular way.
Well, and also it's not easier, it's harder.
It is harder.
And there's a lot more
steps. Say some people have said it's easier. For me, it's harder because in my head, this is the most practical way, which I feel like that's any resistance you're going to get learning something new.
But you shouldn't have to draw a
it's
and then MD, all these things. And for example, division, right? Keist come home, Cam will come home and be like, hey, we're dividing fractions or we're doing this and that. And my husband has a math degree along with the science, so for him to teach them, it's this long explanation because he's all in theory. Me, I'm like, okay, well, here's what you do. You put this number, you draw the, the little thing and you divide that into there and you flip this and you multiply. Well, my teacher said, and I don't understand how, 5 into,
25,
47 or whatever it is. Well, first you're going to write 5 and then you're going to put a 1 and that's 5. And then, 8 5s. So this and you have to write out, this multiplication table. How is that helpful to you instead of just, okay, 5 doesn't go into 4, 5, you know what I mean?
But even think, okay, so I can remember when we were little sitting at a table doing homework at night and mom and dad sitting there working with us. I can't, to date.
Adam has 4 apples.
He didn't hear the first time. You gotta start normal. If Adam has 4 apples, and then the second time, if Adam has 4 apples, and by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time, it's like you're yelling, like that's gonna help him get it. But like if parents are just as frustrated because we can't sometimes help them. But then on the flip side, there are kids who don't have parents to help them.
True.
And my kid doesn't bring homework home. Because she gets everything done, and
if they do, I don't see it.
I don't see it.
They did it on the bus.
And I remember when she was in first grade, I remember like, this was homework. She's like, yeah. I'm like, when did you do this? Like, I don't understand. Because she never, and all my kids won't probably be that way. I don't know, maybe they will, but it's funny, sort of, And then on the flip side of that, like even now, like she doesn't bring homework home. But also, we live in a world where, at least in my teaching world, we cannot give homework. It's interesting, right? Like, I remember so many nights having homework, but since COVID, we can't give homework. It blows my mind, because in my head, I always wondered when I was little, like, why do I need this? Like, why do I need to do this at home? Like, that's so stupid. And now I'm just like, these kids need to, but why?
Something.
Like, why do I feel
not
that
every
way?
day, but something.
That takes extra time outside of the classroom. And I think that's more so what it is for me. Like, understanding everything's not always going to be done in this little time restraint because you were given this. Like, sometimes you're going to have to actually work and spend time and, whatever else.
Yeah. The homework that I see is usually, and it really frustrates my kids and myself, but Horizons homework, which is, my kids are in gifted and talented. Familiar. They're in like gifted and talented.
My oldest isn't gifted too.
And the thing I don't like about it in our district is that everything is a presentation. It's like a slideshow or a PowerPoint. How is that gifted and talented? When you think about when we were in elementary school, Spectra, there was like a class they would go to. They would do hands-on stuff. That's not how it's handled now. And in middle school, it's the history teacher who does the Horizons work. So everything is attuned to history. Everything is about history. And it's very frustrating, at least to my daughter at this point, because it's like, I don't really like history. Why is my Horizons homework, which is my gifted and talented homework, why do I have to talk about dictators? Why do we have to compare? Like, how is that? And they get a grade for it, which can be a detriment to your
their
grade.
GPA and all that,
so, I mean, if you're in a class and you're not in Horizons, you know what I mean? You don't have it assigned and it's not part of your grade. But if you are a student who, and on top of that, they also are in K-levels. So K-level is the advanced version of the class, okay? And then ultimately, when they get in high school, that means that their GPA is on a higher scale if they're still choose to be in K-level. So
it's like having AP right now.
But I will say the thing that I do like about Horizons and K-level classes is that those kids are separated from the rest of the classes. So if you're in K-level or Horizon, then everyone in your class is either K-level or Horizon or both.
Gotcha.
Where my kids are, they're in both. But then if you're not, you're in different classes. And what I find about that is that the kids who are not, that's where the trouble seems to be.
What do you mean?
The kids who cause trouble or in fights or in the...
Oh, they're not in the...
They seem to be in this other grouping, not in the K-level Horizon grouping, but the other one. And they carry this system all the way through high school. So, for me, I don't like that. It's science in elementary, Horizon, it's history in middle school, and I don't know what happens by the time they're in, high school, whatever, where they do those additional projects or whatever. But they do separate the kids who, whatever, and you have a certain level. You have to keep an 85 or a 90 to keep your K level.
Yeah, and so my oldest is in gifted, and it looks very different. I mean, she's in elementary, but they actually bus her. Like, the bus takes her to school, and then she hops on another bus later in the morning that takes her to another school. And all the kids in the district, all the elementary kids in the district go to this particular school. That's where their gifted teacher is housed. So these 3 schools go one day, these 3 schools go another.
For
So
a
it's
full day?
for a full day. So it's
Oh,
once a
wow.
week. Yeah, and she loves it, which I'm so
That's
grateful because
awesome.
she was so incredibly bored because, you know, in first grade she was reading at an 8th grade level, and now as a 3rd grader she's reading at like almost 12th grade level. So girlfriend was bored. But anyway, so they bus them there for the entire day. Like they eat lunch there and everything. And then they come back with, you know, an extra 30 minutes left of the school day so that she gets another recess and all that other stuff. But she really loves it. And I am seeing like I like some of the things that they're learning. And, you know, they get different set of vocabulary every week to learn. And they're like challenging words, like big words. And they were learning about the Amazon. So yeah, so she loves her version of gifted, the projects, the going to another school to experience that, the being on the bus with, you know, kids, and even being in a classroom full of kids that she wouldn't otherwise know or see. But, you know, not every kid gets that experience, because even the process of getting her into gifted, it was like, you know, a series of 3 different tests and all that other stuff. And it was just like, oh, I just feel like, and even that, like she didn't know she was being tested for gifted. And I can remember talking to our gifted teacher and like kids who are being tested and the anxiety that causes, like, you know, and then the list that they sent home talking about what does gifted look like, and like the different like things that were like, oh, a gifted person might look like someone who asks a lot of questions, someone who did it. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, oh, who knew, you know? In my head, that's like a cool part of the education system, that we can offer those things. But I just have a couple more questions. So like, what would you say, what advice do you have to parents that are particularly struggling with the idea of the public school system?
So I have actually started talking to a lot of parents. Well, I just, you know, will be voicing my frustration. And I find like a lot of parents are interested in the homeschooling aspect. And I always hear, if you want to start some sort of co-op, I'd be in. If you, and it's like, yeah, but it's like, well, where do you start, you know? But there's plenty of schools and models, and even in Dallas, I know there's like a schooling system they have set up in some areas where the students will go to school 2 or 3 days a week and then they homeschool. Yeah, and I'd be, you know, up for that. They've actually, since COVID, implemented some online homeschooling or online, like, my kids did Texas Tech K-12, which was like a program through the University, Texas Tech.
Oh, cool.
So it's not just necessarily a BECA or, you know, those traditional programs where the parent is the only person doing it, you know. There's online components.
There's actual instructors.
There's actual
That's
instructors. Cool. There's, you know, and they online schoolwork and things like that. So I mean, I guess I would say if you can find the support with other parents, or, you know, even putting the information out there, I think that a lot of people are more interested in that than just, you know, feel comfortable saying, or, you know, I say whatever, like, well, hey, but.
And when you think about it, the more people who would pull from public and I hear people talk about a little bit of everything, like, oh, my tax dollars are going to the public school, so my kids are going, you know, whatever. But it really would impact the funding that schools get if people started pulling their kids out, you know, because it's a focus on numbers largely.
But the schools could even offer that.
Yeah, that's true.
You saw that they were able to, you know, find alternative ways to teach when COVID hit, you know. So, I mean, and for a while they did offer something like that. You had a choice in our district whether you wanted to send your kids back to school or whether they were going to go and do the online thing, that there was an option. I just don't think it doesn't need to be an 8 to 4. For the ones who chose the online, they were going like 8 to 1 or whatever it was, and you had to have your camera on. And I think that if there's some sort of thing that's offered, where it's sort of a blend of home and a blend of maybe online schooling. The other thing is our district offers, if you live in the district, even if you homeschool your kids, if they go to private school, your kids are still able to participate in after school activities.
I think that's huge. Yep,
they are. So, I mean, they can still get the socialization. I think where me and my husband kind of differ is he feels that schooling was so great. And, you know, like I enjoyed high school. I didn't love middle school, but I enjoyed high school. And I understand that part. But these kids live in a whole different world than we do.
They do.
It's it's completely different. And, you know, they don't feel like they need to go to school to see their friends. You know what I mean? Like they'll talk to them online. They'll, you know what I mean? Whereas us, we couldn't
We
go
didn't have
home
that option. Yeah.
to go outside and be with our friends. You know what I mean? Like,
We had until the street lights came on.
that's correct. So it's like now I'm like, you don't want to go outside. You know, like my kids will go outside. They're, you know, see, we'll take them out and they'll ride their bikes or whatever, or play in the backyard or whatever. But most of the time they're playing with each other.
That's how our kids are.
There's not any other kids
There's
outside.
there's no packs of neighborhood kids. That's what I've noticed. Like there are a couple of kids here and there that we see, but there's not. We used to run like 12, 13 deep between the two streets. It just used to be all of us playing all the time. But also we live in a different world where, you know, parents didn't have to worry as much about their kids.
Sometimes it's preferable that your kids are just playing in their backyard or, you know, you're out there with them because, you know, a lot of these kids that you don't, like we talked about, you know, kids who are, you know, going through different things and you don't even know.
They're exposed to different things.
You don't want your kids necessarily around that. So I'm most of the time okay with that, but sometimes I'm like, hey, you know, do you have a friend that you want to come over? Or, but at the same time, if she wants to go there, I'm like, if I'm going.
Nope, they can always come to my house.
If I'm going, you can go if I'm going, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I have, you know, but but that's what I think that, you know, if there was some sort of, the same way they're using this funding to fluff it up, if they actually put it into something that
more beneficial, we'd see an impact on the whole system. Yep. Well, any last final thoughts or anything you want to share?
No, I think overall that the safety is a big factor in why I feel the way I do, but I felt it for years, and I spent a lot of time praying while my kids are away at school, just throughout the day, for peace within myself and protection. I pray before that, you know, at night and everything else, but like when they're gone, I spend a lot of time doing that as well. And I just think there's a different way. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I get it. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having
where
me.
can people find you or get a hold of you if they have questions or they just maybe want to chat more or get some insight?
They can find me online. If you look on TikTok, I'm the Afro Chameleon. Besides that, I don't have like a website or anything. You can find my sister and then she'll tell me and I'll decide if I want.
And she will.
I'll decide.
So thank you again for joining us today. If there's something that caught your attention or you maybe want to dive into the conversation more, you have questions or whatever, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for tuning into Mom with a Microphone.